16 state governments have gone to court. And then there's the letter that you wrote. And we've been told that in Wobike versus Federal Republic of Federal Government of Nigeria, in Wobike case, the point was made clearly there that for a treaty ratified by Nigeria that to become law in Nigeria, it must be domesticated, ratified under Section 12 sub 2 of the 1999 Constitution. The argument of the governors is that this process was not followed, that the EFCC, ICPC, NFIU, that these were created through executive whim. Now, you have also taken up the matter. Could you help us clarify the issue and what you expect the National Assembly to do?
Thank you very much. Yeah, actually, I had no idea that the cases the states filed were being filed, because I was reviewing my papers for my fall session in the US, and I was doing a paper titled Building Blocks for Economic Stability. And in posing questions to my students, I said, what are the 10 most important factors that impede development? Surprisingly, corruption kept popping up. So I said, this is very familiar to me, because I've been at this EFCC matter from the time of my great friend Nuhu Ribadu. So as I wrote the letter, I got to know that 16 or 17 governors had also filed an action, which is most welcome, because at the end of the day, we need to test institutions. We need to test the validity of the actions of anyone who exercises either legislative or executive authority, because the Supreme Court has power to make that interpretation. Because the case is in court, I'd refrain from discussing the merits, but I'll go around a framework. So, if corruption is a big issue, it's something we must put on the front burner. So I'm very surprised, for instance, that corruption appears in Section 15 of the Constitution under Chapter 2, which is non-justiciable. So you can see the paradox. If corruption is to be an important issue, why is it non-justiciable? But through mechanisms of interpretation, the Supreme Court has held that the EFCC, in the particular cases filed, could do what they did. But as time went on, and in particular the case you referred to, I would urge anyone who is interested in this matter to read the case of Wobike. The Supreme Court castigated the EFCC for being a totally irresponsible organization, going far outside of the scope of its authority, becoming the police, becoming the SFU, becoming the NFU, doing everything. So that's what they cannot do. The other fallacy that I think needs to be debunked is that the National Assembly can exercise power to do anything it likes. No, it can't. The National Assembly's power is constrained by the exclusive list and the concurrent list. So the National Assembly, the big question here is whether the National Assembly can, merely because it's the National Assembly, create any monster. No, it can't. It's limited to the powers given to it, bestowed on it by the Constitution. And my point is that the National Assembly does not have power for some of the reasons you've given, but some of the reasons I have, and I have 10 of them, which I would not like to discuss, given the fact that the matter is in the Supreme Court. So I won't be accused of prejudging a matter that is before the court. But I think my dear friend Femi Falana has provided the perfect answer. By the way, the reason I went to the National Assembly is to say to them, you created this institution. So maybe it's time you also reviewed whether what you created is valid. And let me also do a bit of history on the National Assembly's creation of the EFCC. It was at a time that President Obasanjo was struggling very hard to get the Paris and London clubs right off our debts. And the Paris and London clubs said to Nigeria, well, you don't belong to the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. And not to belong to it would hamper your request for, a loan review. So quickly, the EFCC Act is the fastest legislation ever passed in Nigeria in 2 days. I suspect very strongly that in the course of passing this legislation so fast, a lot of mistakes were made. And one of the mistakes is that the National Assembly exceeded its authority under Section 4 of the Constitution, which imbues it with legislative powers. It exceeded its authority by several ways. Anyone who reads the Act will actually think that EFCC is the Nigerian police force, because that's what it does. So the one point that can be made is, could we have two police forces when the EFCC describes itself in the Act as a police force? But we know that there's only one police force in Nigeria, and that is the Nigeria Police Force. So these and other reasons are what compelled me to say the time has come to deal with this issue squarely. We can't have corruption at the level we have it without saying the agency that, and by the way, let me be very clear, I have absolutely nothing against some of the very fine gentlemen who have worked in the EFCC for a very long time. A name comes to mind in particular, and that is Rotimi Jacobs. He's committed himself as a professional. He's been there for the last 30 years. He's risen to the rank of a senior advocate of Nigeria, and I respect all that he has done.
All right.
That is not to say there isn't a difference between Mr. Jacobs and the EFCC. And that was the point I made to Mr. Bauer when he was on seat as chairperson. So we're going to see what the Supreme Court will say when they come to tackle the point. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. I think that was very important to set the tone for this conversation. Always good to see you, sir. Now, one of the things I would like to ask you, and like you said, just because the matter is in court, there are limits to what we can discuss as to your prayers and what the conclusion of the matter would be. But let me ask, number one, how effective do you think the EFCC has been since its creation in 2003? The reason I ask this question is, if it were very effective, would you be pursuing this matter? Or would you be calling perhaps for a review of the extent of the powers of the EFCC?
Good question. The EFCC, to my mind, if you take the huge amounts of fraud in the country, if you take the huge amounts of corruption in the country, unfortunately, the EFCC has not been effective. I'll just give you one example, because we need money, if you remember that. I was looking up a couple of similar agencies around the world. One that came to mind was the National Crime Detection Agency in the UK. Do you know that the National Crime Detection Agency contributes about 3% to the national budget? Anybody who is landing into Abuja Airport will see thousands upon thousands of empty houses. And there is no need to tell me that those houses have been gotten and built by corrupt, laundered money. So why is the EFCC not focusing on that? I have a client who came to me to say, the EFCC is pursuing me because I'm being accused of not paying rents. Don't you believe that? So if you ask me, the EFCC, in spite of all its braggadocio, hasn't done much. It hasn't done much. Corruption is endemic. It's growing. It's not coming down. So the EFCC is not an efficient organization, period. Apart from that, as I said, it's an unconstitutional organization. So maybe Femi Falana's point, which I saw this morning, is the best way to go. Simply constitutionalize the EFCC. Set out its powers so that it is different from the ICPC. I believe that the ICPC that was established in 2002 was really the organization that should have dealt with crime, corruption. Independent Corrupt Practices is the name of the ICPC. This other one, EFCC, established in 2003, deals with economic and financial crimes. And they've gone way beyond their mandate. Way beyond their mandate. Chasing on the principle of federalism. Okay. The federal government is different from state governments. Okay. So what is the EFCC doing in interfering with matters concerning the states? Okay. So yes, Ruben, I was hearing you saying okay.
Okay, Rufai here, sir. Good to see you again, sir.
Oh, Rufai. Right.
My question is going to be a double-edged sword. Are you saying an organization that had close to 3,785 convictions in 2022 has not done well? Is that what you're saying? You know, are you saying the EFCC has not done well?
If you look at the totality.
Yes.
If you look at the totality, I don't dispute that they have not done cases.
Yes.
But what type of cases? How many convictions have they had in respect of senior public officers?
Over
it's not chasing around people.
Over $121 million recovered.
Yes.
You're saying they've not done well. You see how many convictions?
How much is that in the
as regards senior
how much
people?
Is that in
Is there many
how much is that in the context of the stolen money?
How much is that in the context?
No, that's just you now. That's just for 1 year.
That's just for 1 year, 2022. You also said, I think Joshua Darie, I can mention names on and on and on. Joshua Darie, the Yaya Bello they are going after, most governors that have gone to visit the EFCC, you know, after, and many investigations they have on. The case of the former Anambra governor, are these not big elite individuals? Are these not big people in society?
Sure, they are. They are, but that's not the point. The point is, like the opaqueness of the NNPC. It's not enough to say that the NNPC produces crude oil for Nigeria. The point is, what is it doing for the economy? So you have to take it as a holistic process. And in my view, if the EFCC were even to publish its annual accounts on a yearly basis, then we can know what it's doing, whether it has an impact. If you ask the man on the streets, I doubt that they would be taking the position you are taking. In my view, and I could be wrong, because I'm just Tony Agbakoba, I do not pretend that I have all the wisdom, but as far as I'm concerned, I feel that the EFCC is being hampered by the unclarity in relation to its constitutional establishment. And by the way, two important persons have made this point. Upon being, confirmed as Attorney General of the Federation on the floor of the National Assembly, Lateef Fagbemi, who is a very good friend, said that he thought that the configuration of the law enforcement agencies on serious crime was something that he would address. He didn't see why we should have an EFCC or an ICPC, all clashing heads on what should be done, not to add the nefarious activities of the DSS that comes in when it's supposed to be doing internal security. But these are micro issues that I think can be tackled if the National Assembly agrees to hold a public hearing as I have requested.
But how do you, in wrapping up, how do you blame an EFCC that takes the cases to court and you have a liturgy in the legal process? Look at the case of Yaya Bello. EFCC has put all their cases to court.
Sure.
They've gone after all the big people. You say they've not investigated the NNPC and everything. Yeah, that's a point. I mean, I concede to you on that. But in other cases, the fear of EFCC has become the beginning of wisdom. If not for EFCC, we will not know. I don't support EFCC directly. I have my grasp with EFCC. But I'm just playing devil's advocate here. If we've got for EFCC, we will not know the billions and billions being talked about with Yaya Bello. We will not know the billions and billions being talked about in other quarters. We will not know the recovery of monies.
Sure.
So EFCC, however imperfect, have stamped their authority one way or the other in the economic and financial crime space in the country. Shouldn't we just cut them some slack as a result of this?
I disagree.
And fix them what needs to be fixed?
Sure. I'll just give you a good example. The current budget has a deficit of about 12 trillion. If the EFCC were to concentrate on the property that has been laundered in Abuja, we will not have a deficit. So you're looking at specific names, and I agree with you entirely, which is why I made the point that there are very, very many, good guys in the EFCC. One person I have the greatest respect for is the gentleman I had mentioned earlier. So there are fine gentlemen in the EFCC. I don't believe that the current chair isn't a fine gentleman. But that's not the point. The point is the EFCC constitutional? Don't stray from that point. Is the EFCC constitutional? You must work within the Constitution. That's what Professor Wambeze called the notion of limited government.
Mr. Agbakoba.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Falana SAN, his argument is almost like a counter-argument to yours. He is saying that your premise is based on federalism and the Constitution, and that, therefore, the EFCC is an unlawful organization, quite a lengthy thing, and that you had appeared in a case, I think Ondo Attorney General versus AG Federation. You quoted that case. He also quoted
Abia.
He also quoted AG Abia versus AG Federation and a number of other cases, including Olafisoye case and all of that. However, when you say, okay, you can understand where it's coming from, that the EFCC, ICPC should be constitutionalized. How? Because now he's saying
put it in the Constitution.
He's saying that the governors should not have gone to the Supreme Court. But the governors in the 16 state governments, they are saying that in fact EFCC, ICPC, Process of Crime Act should be nullified. They are asking for a nullification.
Yes.
Because it's unconstitutional, it's illegal.
But I'm not.
Now, what happens?
I'm not the Ruben. I'm not the. No, I'm not. No, I'll stop you there. I'm not the governors. I'm Agbakoba. I'm different. Don't make a case as if I'm the governors. I'm talking about my letter, not the governors.
No. I'm just asking. No, I'm just asking for your opinion. Whether you think that these bodies should nullify.
No. I'm sorry. That is not a question I will answer because I didn't go to court. I wrote a letter distinct from the governors. So I'm not. If you ask the governors those questions, I have my own clear view why the EFCC is an unconstitutional organization. And remember, Ruben, this is a point I've been making for the last 30 years. It's not today. And as I said, I have nothing against the EFCC, but I don't think that the EFCC is doing what it ought to do in the context of poverty. If you read people like Thomas Piketty on capitalism, he will tell you inequality is caused by poverty and corruption. And I feel that if the EFCC is doing its job properly, it will get a lot more money than Rufai is suggesting. So I'm not going to make a case for the governors. I'm not sitting here talking about the governors. I'm talking about me and my concern about the EFCC. And the only point I take from what my brother Femi Falana says is to resolve this matter, simply constitutionalize the anti-corruption agencies so there will be no dispute. But right now, as far as I'm concerned, until proven wrong, there is a problem with the EFCC's constitutional arrangements because it is beyond the scope of the National Assembly to make a law. I don't even want to refer to the point you made, which is a very strong point about Section 12 of the Constitution, and whether under the United Nations Convention, a legislation should have been passed. The Mobike case recognized that the EFCC was created as a result of that convention, and the convention was brought to Nigeria, and the convention introduced the EFCC bypassing Section 12. That's a problem for the Supreme Court to resolve. But that's not my point. My point is simply that the EFCC's creation is outside the legislative scope of the National Assembly. That's my point. Whether I'm right or wrong will be proved when the case is heard. And if I'm wrong, and in any case, let's be clear. Why are we afraid to have discussions? This is a democracy, for Christ's sake. Yes. Why are we afraid to have discussions? I should be saluted for bringing points up. I've been bringing points up. I brought the point up about the effect of the FCT and its impact on the electoral process. People have to speak. That's why it's a democracy. It's because we don't speak, we're all cowards. Nobody says a thing that we're not growing. So please. Okay. You should be encouraging me to talk.
No.
And let me also ask other Nigerians to speak.
That's why you are.
Let's all speak, please.
That's why you are.
Let's all speak.
We'll take a short break and then we'll come back to you. Welcome back to the morning show. Our guest is still Mr. Agbakoba, SAN, former president of the Nigeria Bar Association. Mr. Agbakoba, can you hear us now from the studio? Hello, sir. Hello?
Can you stop that?
Sir, you can hear us now? See how this connection problem. Mr. Agbakoba SAN, can you hear us from the studio? He's still not hearing us. Okay. Well, I wanted to ask Mr. Agbakoba that one of the points made by Femi Falana SAN is that in another case, the court had ruled that the EFCC is neither a state nor a federation. Okay, I understand we have him now. Mr. Agbakoba, are you back with us? You can hear us?
Sure, I can hear you, Ruben.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I was asking for a set of clarifications. Sure. One of the points that Mr. Falana made in his own statement is that in another case in the Supreme Court, that the position had been taken that the EFCC is neither a state nor a federation or is a section of the federation. And that to that extent, the EFCC cannot be brought to the Supreme Court. So do you agree with him in that regard, that the governors should have gone to perhaps another court? That's a precedent that he established in that his own statement. What do you think about that?
Yes. I think Femi is procedurally correct. Unfortunately, I haven't read it. So what the Supreme Court's jurisdiction to entertain, the Supreme Court has 3 jurisdictions, original, advisory, and appellate. So this case is proceeding on the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction, which would mean state versus federation or federation versus National Assembly. But it is the same Supreme Court that some assaulted and took that case concerning Emefele's printing of notes, remember? Printing of notes. And the Supreme Court said, in spite of the fact that the CBN was an agency, it would have jurisdiction. So I'm not sure. But generally speaking, as I understand it, it's the state versus the federation and the National Assembly. So I don't know how the Supreme Court will deal with this point. But if the Supreme Court has taken a matter in respect of an agency, then I think that they are bound by their decision unless reversed.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Agbakoba.
I hope that point is clear.
Very clear.
Yeah.
All right. So this is not the first time you've talked about the EFCC. I recall in 2022, during the Kogi State government issue, you had actually talked about the politicization of the EFCC. And so since then, you've asked the EFCC to do what they were set up to do as opposed to involving itself in politics. Has anything improved since then? This was under a different administration. Now, but under a Tinubu administration, the Kogi State former governor is still under investigation by the EFCC. Has this changed in any regard? And since we're talking about constitutionalizing it, what are some of the things that should be enshrined in that to ensure that we strengthen that institution and it actually does what it was set up to do? Because like you said, corruption is still rife. We still need a body to tackle the menace of corruption.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, to answer this question is why I wrote that letter. And I do hope that the letter and my friend Femi's letter to the National Assembly will provide the canvas to deal with these issues. But I think in order to be able to resolve this issue about the legitimacy of the EFCC, it's either for the National Assembly to clarify exactly what the EFCC should be doing. If you read Professor Nwabeze's treatise in several books, he feels that the EFCC, and that was a point I made in Asia Beer that I appeared, that the EFCC has no business under the principle of federalism to trench on the powers of a state. I accept that, but unfortunately we were overruled. So you are bound by the Supreme Court's decision. But democracy tells you that Nigeria is a federal system with 36 states. So I now see that some states, I think Lagos, has passed its own anti-graft legislation. And when we talk about the federal process, so we're now expanding the argument to what type of federalism do we need? We don't need this sort of centralized federalism where Abuja takes all the decisions. The most important decision ever taken by President Tinubu are twofold. One, the removal of subsidy. It may sound controversial. And two, the fact that he challenged the usurpation of powers, again about usurpation of powers by the states, emasculating the local governments, crippling them. I was so delighted to see Fagbemi argue that case, and he was successful. So I was making that point earlier about we have to test the constitutional processes. Whether one believes in it or not, we have to test it. It's the only way to strengthen the institutions of Nigeria. And I will keep on testing it. And I might be wrong, but as far as I'm concerned, the EFCC is going way beyond its remit in chasing people that are not within its scope of powers. And Mobike, which I have right here, I've read it. Mobike makes clear that the EFCC is a rogue organization doing what it ought not to be doing. Okay. So let this case that the governors file really determine the scope of the powers of the EFCC. And hopefully, my letter to the National Assembly, coupled with Femi's letter to the National Assembly, will then assist the National Assembly to review everything and then solve the problem by constitutionalizing the EFCC or determining the scope. Why do we have the EFCC, the Special Fraud Unit, and the ICPC, and the police all doing the same thing? It doesn't make sense. And then we're not catching anything. Okay. So Rufai was talking about monies recovered by the EFCC. I applaud them for that. But how much of it is being recovered, stolen money? How much of it is being recovered? So President Tinubu has done the right thing by, yes. Okay, I mean, I listen to you.
Like you said, right? Go on. I get your point. And I get the point for federalism here. And I get all of those arguments. But in also arguing further, my points will be number one. We can say the EFCC has not done enough. Now we are saying it's good the governors have taken them to court. Are the governors not taking the EFCC to court for their own selfish interest? Because, okay, look at states like Kogi. What do you expect? Kogi has always been a loggerhead, even when Yaya Bello was there with the EFCC. At some point, they had whatever the EFCC, at some point there. Most governors that you see have always been at loggerheads with the EFCC. So as regards those state governors,
absolutely,
I don't care. But most importantly, the point of, you were trying to make comparison, okay, the body in the UK that does that, a lot of that, okay, we're still having a lot of empty houses in Abuja, EFCC have not found them. In the UK too, you have a lot of empty houses bought with fraudulent money in Chelsea. It's not all of them that have been revamped. The EFCC too will tell you that they've been recovering most of those properties, you know, and putting them out there. Yes, you've made a strong point as regards transparency. That could be the order of the day. You've made a strong point as regards even the monies recovered by the EFCC might be relooted. That's a strong point. But my fear is throwing the baby away with the bathwater because some governors are disgruntled with the process because it doesn't favor them in the end. Now somebody say maybe they go dip their hand in the cookie jar. Now we send them message. I mean, if we've had governors in this country that EFCC didn't need to call. EFCC didn't call Shekarawa after his time. Sure. EFCC didn't call Donald Duke after his time. So I also am against the EFCC on a lot of things, like the invasion in Auburn FM in Enugu. But when it comes to calling a spade, EFCC too has brought some sanity to the system. That's just my argument. So I don't care too much about the state governors. I'm looking for lacunas.
No. Well, Rufai, we're not on the same page, unfortunately.
It's
you
fine.
are talking about the things the EFCC has done. And I've just told you that I even recognize that. But we can't, because EFCC has done nice things, say that Nigeria, it's like saying that somebody is doing something proper, but he is doing it unconstitutionally. The time for Nigeria to be driven by constitutional processes is now.